Let's start with this one. How do we start conversations with Christian organisations, like mission organisations, to make their LGBT policies clear whilst recognising they're on a journey? Now, I find, part of my work today is having conversations with churches and missionary organisations and so on. Not as much as I would like. If I try to take the initiative with most of them, they don't wish to know, really. But usually there's a way in that God provides when I happen to meet somebody who's from their missionary organisation or from their church, who's come to me because they're in trouble. So what I like to try and do is I contact the person in the organisation, the head of the organisation or the church, and I say, somebody from your organisation has come to see me because they're troubled with issues of their sexuality. And as I know you have pastoral care and concern for them, and I don't wish to be divisive, can we meet so that we can talk about how we can work together in the best interests of these people, you see? And of course they know now, if they didn't know before, they know now where I'm coming from. And I try and find out where they're coming from. But usually it's somebody else who is of interest to them in some way that in a way facilitates the conversation. I don't even have to say who it is. I suppose I could invent it if I wanted to, but I haven't needed to do that. I don't need to go looking for work for myself. But it's amazing how these things do come up. And there have been a number of major Christian organisations, perhaps I shouldn't name them if we're going to put this on YouTube, where it seems, I've noticed that God very cleverly puts gay people in certain senior positions, and they remain in the closet and they hide it for as long as they can, and eventually it comes out and they leave. And then God brings somebody else to go into that position, and again and again. And eventually the organisation has to realise that gay people are not just rarities who are out there that they can put outside their organisation, that we're everywhere, and they need to start asking questions. And I think the best thing is when the founder of a ministry suddenly discovers that he's got a gay son or a lesbian daughter, and then is faced with the question, do I throw them out? Do I stop talking to them? Or do I start asking the difficult questions? And it doesn't necessarily mean to say they change their minds, but usually what it means is they become much more compassionate and concerned to be careful about it. And the person who wrote this question, of course, you're right, they're on a journey like we all have been. And rightly so, the journey is not to be missed, because it's only by taking step by step, wrestling with these things, that you come to a mature and solid understanding of what God is saying to you. And if you dodge the difficult questions or just try and find a way around them, then you never make it through that process of maturing in your faith and in your understanding of God.
Thank you.
I hope that's a helpful reply. Christian Concern represents one of those rather extreme organisations that believe they have the truth, and that truth is not up for any discussion. You either accept the truth or you reject it. It's a black and white decision, so there's nothing to discuss. And as I was mentioning to you in a conversation just now, I had a wonderful opportunity to do a workshop last year at the Anglican Synod meeting in York, and Jane Ozanne had invited me to do this workshop on the journey of courage, and Andrea Williams came to that along with several of her friends, if she has any, but people who work with her anyway. And I knew that they were there just to study what I was saying so that they could be armed to fight back and say where I was wrong. I've had quite a lot of people who've admitted to me that, well, they've read my articles with interest, and I know perfectly well one pastor from one big church admitted to me he'd started to read my website when his organisational denomination had asked him to write a theological paper on homosexuality. And of course he omitted to say, but I knew perfectly well, he looked at my website because I articulated the articles quite well, and he wanted to find his ammunition to show where I was wrong. But you don't learn what truth's about that way. We learn through relationship. You notice with Jesus, everybody learned through relationship with him, not just listening to his words. It was chewing on his words and making them a part of their life that changed them, not just hearing religious propositions.
Wasn't it in Acts where it said all that Jesus did and taught?
Yes, exactly.
He did it first and then taught.
And Jesus once said, even if you can't believe in the things I say, learn from the things I do. It's particularly hard for LGBT people when we've suffered so much. And I think part of the hardness of that is because we've doubted ourselves so much, and we thought we were rejected by God. People taught us we were. And it takes a long time for God to get that message through to our hearts individually, that he really does love us and we don't have to be afraid of other people's opinions. It is very hard. But it is amazing how faithful God is to that journey, that however much suffering we go through, there comes a point where we can lay aside all the criticism and the hostility, and you think, they're wrong. And I'm actually, the best place I can be is to be myself and dare to believe that God loves me as I am. And I think that is the real watershed moment, the turning point where we don't look back anymore. Oh, of course we'll have our doubts and we'll have our moments of thinking, am I doing the right thing? Like marrying a 30-year younger person or whatever else it might be. But it is an amazing journey we go on, that we come to that place of maturity where we think, I'm okay being myself and I don't care what anybody else thinks about it. If they don't like it, that's their problem. It just isn't mine anymore. And it's okay for them to doubt or to question, but I'm happy being myself, and that's a good place to be in. I think God speaks to me most when I'm not consciously listening. In fact, because my head is so full of stuff all the time, it's very hard for God to get through all that, even though I'd love him to. So he waits for moments when my mind is just quiet, and then he dives in when he wants to say something. At least I think that's the way he does it. I remember once I did have a great sense of God speaking to me, and I was in my photography days, and I used to use lots of equipment. Do you remember those days? Lots of lighting equipment to light big buildings, because I was an architectural photographer. I was literally walking down a spiral staircase in the cathedral with 2 lighting stands in my hands, just trying not to trip down these spiral steps. And suddenly God spoke to me something about his amazing love for me. I thought, do you really think this is the right moment to tell me about that? I'm busy, can't you see, with this photography business, shouldn't you be telling me this in a moment of quiet prayer? Oh no. As if God said, no, now is the moment I can get through to you, because you're not fighting me or trying to be spiritual about this, so I can get through to you. And the thing about Paolo, when you talk to him about, put yourself in my position. God speaks when you're least expecting him to, I think. And it's rather lovely that he makes that effort to speak to you when you're not trying to be spiritual and you're not trying to be anything special. You're just being yourself and getting on with life. But it's not going to be like that necessarily for everybody.
When he speaks to you, is it a voice or is it thought?
It's an impression that happens deep within. Some of the most powerful times I've felt that have been when I've been trying to help somebody else. And I remember there was one guy who became a good friend who was really, really tormented by loads of conflicting issues in his life. And I was thinking, oh God, how am I to help this guy? And I listened to him, agonize about things for probably half an hour or something. And then suddenly I had this picture of a whole string of events that had happened in his life that had led him to this place of conflict. And I said, I think this is what's happened, if I've understood you correctly. And I just spelled out these various steps. And he looked at me in absolute astonishment. He said, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. And I knew that just had been given to me by God at that moment, just to help him through. And the other wonderful, wonderful little things that have happened. One story I'd love to tell, and I don't think you'll have heard it before, but when we were running our live-in program, people were living in community for a year. We would start with a retreat at the beginning of the year in which people talk about what they hoped for from the year, and they'd introduce themselves and they'd tell their stories. And then at the end of the year, we'd have another retreat to talk about what we'd learned during the year. And I would, knowing that if you've ever lived in a Christian community, and people are often very suspicious of ours because they think, don't all these men jump into bed with each other all the time? That's what they imagine, you see. I said, believe me, even if they wanted to the first night, by the time they get to the second night, they're so irritated by their roommates and so on that the difficulty is to try and get them to be civil to each other because, people can be difficult to live with and irritating. And part of the community life is just learning to rub shoulders with one another and get on with each other and trying to be a little bit understanding and forgiving. Anyway, one year there was one particularly exasperating, difficult man on the course who just was the bane of my life. He was very clever and he would always be criticising me for everything and basically putting me in positions if I didn't know what I was doing. He was a very demoralising chap and I knew he was much cleverer than me intellectually. Anyway, at the end of the year, I had set this exercise where we would spend a little bit of time saying what we had learned to appreciate about each other through the year. I knew this would be a bit of a test for people, but I wanted the people to be able to go away feeling they'd heard somebody say something nice about them, especially if they'd been in conflict. Anyway, there's this I could usually think of lovely things to say about each person because I really genuinely loved everybody who came on our programs. I'd really prayed for them and I'd worked with them and so on, but not this guy. I thought, oh God, the only good thing I can think about this is we've got to the end of the year and I don't need to see him again. That's how I felt about it. So I thought, I've got to think of something nice to be able to say about this fellow, so please help me out, Lord. You say, you made him, you must be able to think something you love about him. So I sat with a pen and paper. I said, Lord, please show me something and I'll write it down and I can say at this talk. And do you know, the most beautiful thing happened? God then spoke to me and I listed down a whole load of things about this chap which were absolutely amazing. And that one contribution I made was better than all of the others, and it completely changed our relationship, and we really respected each other at the end. And that was a beautiful God-given moment, where our relationship was transformed because out of sheer desperation, I'd turn to God and say, please tell me something good about this guy, so I can't think of anything. And those moments of desperation are often very fruitful in prayer. Well, I sometimes reckon when I look back at it, I started asking the questions 7 years before I was able to articulate the fact that I thought we got it wrong. 7 years is a long time, and I just keep revisiting it again and again because the traditional evangelical position on homosexuality is utterly uncompromising. It's wrong, full stop, no argument. Let's not, like Christians concerned, we're not discussing this. You either accept the truth or you reject it. And that's a hard brick wall to be hitting against all the time. And I keep coming up against it, and I think there is no room to move here. There's no room for growth. There's no room for changing our understanding. There's no discussion. I don't know where to go with this. And so sometimes when you hit a brick wall, you can't get through it. Well, in a sense, you sort of get round it. It's like a mountain, really. You have to climb over. But it took a long time, and I was naturally, by nature, a conservative conformer, really. I'd much prefer to be a conformist. I couldn't be like Peter Tatchell, always, waving flags and, stirring things up. Of course, Peter Tatchell was one of our arch opponents in the early years. He used to come and protest at our meetings, and he'd bring people from Outrage, and they'd come with their placards, and one meeting we were holding, they'd come and seize the microphone from us and warn everybody there that we were a dangerous organisation and they shouldn't listen to us. It was a very aggressive tactic and very intimidating, and didn't change my mind at all. And years later, I was able to invite Peter Tatchell to one of our Courage meetings, and I introduced him, and I said to him, this evening, we're very pleased to have Peter Tatchell come share with us. This is the fourth time Peter Tatchell has been to one of our meetings, and the first time he's been invited to it. But he is the most amazing man, and I realised that whether he knows it or not, he's a man of God. He's a prophet in our nation. Because I said to him in the question time, after he'd explained about his Christian background and how now he didn't believe in anything, I said, he also talked about the terrible persecution he went through and the beatings up and the bricks through the windows and all sorts of horrible things that have happened to him. I said, however do you sustain yourself through this? What gives you the motivation? And quick as a flash, he said, it was the Sermon on the Mount. So I said, but you as a professing non-Christian say that the strength comes to you to do this through the Sermon on the Mount. He said, yes, because Jesus was always the one reaching out to the outcast, and that's what I do. It's an uncomfortable place to be, but it burns inside me, and I can't stop myself. And I thought, where have I heard that before? Jeremiah said that. And so this man is a man of God, and he's a prophet to the nation, whether he realises it or not. and we should listen to him. He's an amazing chap. Over the question of our approach to homosexuality, yes, it was about 7 years, I reckon, of serious questioning, and then I finally had to give in to realising I'd been wrong about it. It was hard to do that because of the self-doubt that would keep coming and being presented with these two polar opposites and having to decide what to do with it. But people's lives were at stake, and that's what changed things really. And I felt I owed it to the people who came for help to change my mind about it, because I wanted to see people walk out with joy, not walk out in misery and carry on in misery. That was very important. But in every other issue, I think it takes time to work through, keep coming back to it, chewing it a bit more. We sort of recognise, and people rightly say to us, oh, don't worry too much about what other people think of you, because you are loved by God as you are. But it takes a very long time for any of us to truly believe that. And I think, in a sense, when you do truly believe it, the question isn't important anymore, in a funny sort of way. But you don't want to be arrogant, do you, or negative, you say, by saying, oh, I don't care what anybody else thinks about it. And I was just thinking of somebody who deals with that sort of conflict when he faces conflicts and people he falls out with them, and you think, oh, I don't care what they think about me anyway. But actually he does care, and he just hasn't worked out how to resolve it. And I'm glad in a way that underneath he does care, because otherwise he'd be an arrogant sod and we wouldn't want to know him. So I just think this is all part of the journey of life, of learning to make relationships with the people. And of course, for all of us, we have to, the people we're closest to, like our parents maybe, or our brothers and sisters, their opinions about us matter greatly, because if they reject us, then we lose the people who we've grown up with and been closest to. And sadly, especially for LGBT people, they do lose relations with their families when their family rejects them. I mean, Paolo's mother won't have anything to do with him. Just went back last weekend to Italy and she wouldn't speak to him. His dad does, fortunately. That's dreadfully painful to deal with. But there's nothing you can do, because you've got your face will either go back into the closet and pretend I'm not gay anymore. Well, is that what she wants? But no, the truth is out of the bag now, and he can't turn the clock back. So he's got to wait for her to deal with her stuff. But these things are all very painful and difficult, but they are part of the journey of life. And the important thing is we don't allow ourselves to become bitter against the people who oppose us, and we are patient with ourselves in that learning process, because we're going to get things wrong all the time. But again, I think prayer helps us. I've fallen out with a few people in my life. I mean, I'm quite a nice, easy chap to get on with most of the time, but occasionally people have pressed my buttons and I've really let rip, and I've said things I shouldn't and messed up a relationship, and then I've repented of it and pleaded with God that I could recover the relationship, and in most cases God has turned it for good, and I've become better friends with the person afterwards as a result, because we've kind of become reconciled to each other. But it's not always possible, and that's sad. I think there's a lot that is positive in scriptures that we just choose to ignore. I mean, it's quite interesting. I was having a conversation with the bishop recently, and I said to him, why is it that we admire the relationship between David and Jonathan so much? We know that the Bible teaches that David is a man after God's own heart, even though he could sometimes sin grievously, like with Bathsheba, another man's wife. But how am I therefore to understand his relationship with Jonathan, where David said, your love was greater than the love of women? Now, as a gay man in a relationship with another man, I understand exactly what David and Jonathan were feeling for each other. It's perfectly clear to me. I'm not saying that they had a sexual relationship. I have no idea whether they did or didn't. We're not told. But the thing we rejoice over is that they had such an amazing depth of relationship. Now, why is that dangerous for me as a gay man, but great for you as a straight man? And if you think it's great for you as a straight man, as an example, why don't you follow it? Who are the friends in your life? Who are the Jonathans in your life? Or the Davids in your life, you see? We couldn't answer it at all, because of course you never think about it. But people skate over the scriptures and they think, oh well, what a wonderful, noble relationship David and Jonathan had. Yes, I agree. It was good for us too. I find great encouragement for it. Or Ruth and Naomi too. I mean, I've known lesbian women tell me they can see what was going on. in that relationship. You don't need to spell it all out. And then what about Jesus' relationship with his beloved disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved, repeated 3 times in the Gospel of John? What about Paul's relationship with Timothy? These were intimate relationships that meant so much to them. Are they not good role models for us as gay people? Why wouldn't they be? And then there are other situations such as Jesus' healing of the centurion's servant. It's just so obvious what was happening there. The Jews hated the Romans, not only because they were occupiers, but they were renowned for having boy slaves or lovers or male lovers. And why would a centurion come to Jesus and plead with him to heal his servant? I mean, for a Roman centurion, if a servant died, they were 2 a penny, just go and get another one. Why would he be bothered about it? But it explains in the scriptures that the centurion loved this servant. And Jesus recognized it and said, oh yes, I'm happy to come to your house and heal this man. Oh no, he says, no need for you to do that. I'm a man under authority. If I say to somebody to do something, they go and do it. So all you need to do is give the word. And Jesus said, gosh, I've never come across faith like this in all of Israel. Amazing. I'm sure Jesus knew exactly what was happening there. He was in love with this lad. And he was terrified he was going to die because he would lose him because he loved him. And in fact, I think there's the word that's translated traditionally as servant can actually be translated lover as well. But the traditional translators don't like that translation, so they keep that hidden from us. But there was clearly an instance of Jesus happy to walk into the life of a gay man and heal his lover. And we choose not to read it like that. And the more you look at it, the more encouragement there is. You look at what Jesus says about eunuchs. Some are eunuchs because they were born that way. Oh, right, well, eunuch is just a word for people who are unable to marry in the conventional sense. So somebody of the opposite sex. It can mean people who are castrated, who are made that way by men. But Jesus makes it clear that some people will not marry in the accepted sense. They're called eunuchs in biblical times. And then you look at the Old Testament, all the references towards eunuchs, and you think, there's something very strange here about it. Why are all these men in the harems of kings? It's not just castrated men always. I think they're doing the hairdressing and the dress design. I think this sounds awfully familiar territory. And you think, I know what's going on here. And the scriptures can be opened up to us and begin to see what's happening, because we're not looking for it. We're not prejudiced about it. But most people don't look at it because they're not interested. I mean, nobody was interested in eunuchs in the Old Testament or New Testament times. They were people to be pitied. But we can understand better what they were. I had been a chorister at St Paul's Cathedral when I was a boy, so I was there in the 1960s as part of the choir, and so I had a relationship with the cathedral from that point of view. But much later on, as a professional photographer, I did a lot of work photographing cathedrals and stately homes. And as it happened that year when the wedding was announced, I'd been doing a lot of new photography in St Paul's Cathedral. And I knew the chap who was the registrar, which is like the administrator of the cathedral, a man called Commander Shears. And we were on very good terms with him, and just because I'd been working there a lot. And when the royal wedding was announced, everybody from the press all the way around the world wanted to have press passes to be able to photograph the royal wedding. And the procedure usually is that if you wish to be a photographer at an event like that, you have to apply to Buckingham Palace for a press pass. And because there are so many, they ballot them. So you take the luck of the draw as to whether your ticket is drawn on the ballot. And we knew, I was working for the small publishing firm at the time, we knew there's not a chance that we would ever be able to compete with the world press for this opportunity. So my boss rang up the cathedral and said, well, we supply the cathedral with colour slides and lots of other publications for your book still, and we'd like to be able to take pictures of the royal wedding as much as anything else to give St Paul's the publications of their own of this wedding, you see. Can you do anything to help us? So this chap, Commander Shears, thought about it and rang me up a few days later, and he said, I've been thinking about this question. How would you like to be our official photographer, you see? So I thought, well, that'd be wonderful, you see. So I went to discuss it with him at the cathedral, and he told me where everything was going to happen, and he said, where do you want to be? Because for an event like that, you can't move around. You take one position, you're stuck there. So I worked it out that there's this place above the choir stalls that I should be in. He said, oh, okay, that's all right. Well, I'll arrange that. Well, anyway, Buckingham Palace were furious about this. They said, well, you can't allow this. And he said, well, why ever not? This is our cathedral, and we've given you every facility you could wish for this royal wedding. And we want to have our own official record for the cathedral records in the archives, you see. They said, yes, but that this chap's a professional photographer. He'll be competing with the world press. He says, well, what do you expect me to do, get an amateur? So he stood his ground, and I got this top position in the cathedral. But the one thing was, we were not permitted to use the pictures I took to compete with the world press. We had to keep them for the cathedral. But we had them on sale there within 2 or 3 days at the cathedral. And it was really interesting. Nobody else had such a good position to photograph the royal wedding from. Amazing.
Wow.
Because Buckingham Palace weren't in charge of the positions in that way. So that's that story.
Thank you. That's a good note to finish
My
on,
claim to
isn't it?
fame.
Thank you very, very much indeed.
Lovely to see you all. Thank you.
Usually we break into little groups, but we won't now because people just tea, coffee and chat to each other and talk about some of the things that Jeremy has said.
Yeah.
So let's give him a hand, shall we?